Hey everyone, I'm Mary Frances Porter, and thank you for joining me today. I am going to introduce you guys to the Impact Story Strategy and give you a little tour of the Impact Story Academy. Specifically, what we're going to do is I'm going to show you how the Impact Story Strategy relieves you of having to prove your impact. I'm going to walk you through the Impact Story Academy sessions, and we're going to take a peek at the tools and resources that are included in the Academy. I've been working with nonprofits and their funders for over 20 years. And during that time, I have seen the pressure that both parties of the social sector are under. For nonprofits, it's this pressure to almost daily have to prove your impact. How is it that you're impacting people? How is it that you're moving the dial in the community? And all this pressure really feels overwhelming and like a whole extra job on top of service provision. For funders, I've seen two parts of pressure that they felt. One is to support grantees in doing their best work, and the other is to be able to roll up the data that they get from their grantees into showing how they actually are supporting mission change. And again, this feels really complicated and difficult, and I've seen lots of funders really kind of just struggle with what to do about this. In understanding this pressure and what it is that's going on in the social sector that creates this pressure, I've identified four separate challenges that I think are really behind it. The first challenge is this pressure to do program evaluation. And I want to talk about where I think this comes from. You know, in the 1940s and 50s, after World War II, all sorts of different social sector programs social programs were being put into place. And people started to wonder whether or not they were actually doing any good. So it was in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s that program evaluation science really became a thing. And social scientists started to research these programs over time to see whether or not people who got services at one point in time were actually still benefiting later. And so it was really in this latter part of the 1900s that we started to think about the impact of social programs. In around the year 2000, a couple of things happened. One was all the research that had been being done in the 50s, 60s, and 70s over time was starting to be published. So they now had 20, 30, 40 years of research that was ready to be put into view. And the internet was a thing. And so there started to become all these online libraries of evidence-based practices. And especially in the social sector, we started to become really familiar with these. What works? And in fact, the link here on this slide is the What Works Clearinghouse. What kinds of programs can we put in place that will actually help people? Then in 2009, when Obama was elected, he really focused on policies that were based on what science said worked. And it was kind of the combination of all these things that really started to put words like sample size and statistics and control group and long-term impact and statistically significant just in our everyday language in the social sector. And it made it easy to forget that these terms are all scientific terms that relate to scientific tools that program evaluation scientists use to prove that programming works. But nonprofit professionals and their funders, honestly, are not scientists. They're practitioners. And what we lack is a structure and a way of talking about tracking impact in that practitioner setting. In the last few years, there have been a couple of movements in that direction. The first is that in 2010, the Gates Foundation started to talk about actionable measurement. And actionable measurement, they defined as something that actually helps the nonprofits take action, improve programming, information and data that can be fed back into the organization to move the organization forward. And in 2016, they joined a large group of other big funders to form Listen for Good. And Listen for Good is an initiative that encourages the collecting of client feedback as a tool for building equity and program improvement. But even with these advances, like I said before, we still sort of lack like real clarity on what we need to measure, how we need to measure it, and what those structures are that are really important in the world of practice. Related to having to do program evaluation science is this idea that data collection is complicated. In 2018, the Stanford Social Innovation Review did a survey of thousands of social sector leaders, both from nonprofits and funders, and found that only about half were infrequently gathering client feedback. And the main reason they were infrequently gathering client feedback is because it was just too hard. And if you think about it, gathering, tracking impact shouldn't be more difficult than tracking your budget. That's within the mission and the reasonableness of practitioners. You have money coming in and you have goodness going out. We should be able to track them with about equal complexity. What I also found is that when organizations do have data, they actually struggle with using it. And we have, again, some recent surveys that show that this is the case. One Cause, which is a fundraising consultancy, surveyed about 1,000 nonprofits in 2022, and they found that 73%, almost 3 out of 4, had some data but didn't really know how to make it actionable. Less than 1 in 5 had all the data and the ability to use that data. This was also found locally. My Center for Nonprofit Excellence here in Virginia, the CNE, did a survey of about 240 nonprofits in the state, and they found that 80% of respondents felt that their evaluation was an urgent need. And again, only about 13 felt that evaluation was a strength. So that was pretty similar to the research from before, or the study from before. This year, the Center for Evaluation and Innovation surveyed 106 foundations and found that between 62 and 81% of foundation learning and evaluation staff were saying that using evaluation data is a challenge, whether they were using it to help their grantees or to have insights for the foundation or to figure out how the foundation should approach its work in the future. All of these staff that were trained in evaluation, that were hired specifically for learning and evaluation, still struggled with how to use the data. So this continues to speak to the need for some sort of structure or way of actually collecting and using data in the social sector. One of the problems associated or challenges associated with how you use data is whose story you're telling. Because funders are the ones with the money and they're funding nonprofits to do programming, funders are often controlling the story. And the things that are important to them are that priority populations are served, that priority issues are addressed, and that their grantees are serving enough people and impacting enough people so that they're able to say that they're contributing to systems change. The United Way in the 1980s started to really use something called a logic model to help tell the story of how funding the inputs results in outcomes that change people's lives for nonprofits. So nonprofits routinely create logic models for funders describing how the funding is going to actually be used to change people's lives. The problem with this, aside from the fact that the logic model language is a little bit wonky, is that it's focused on inputs. It's very funder specific. And when a nonprofit is collecting data related to lots of different inputs, what happens to their data is they stop really owning the story. The data stops telling a coherent story for the organization. When they need to tell a story, they go into all the files where they're collecting data for all their different grants, and they put it together into something pretty. I call this like the shell art version of storytelling. And it is pretty and it can be very effective. But what it really lacks is the story as it comes from the nonprofit, which puts the nonprofit in the position of being able to say, this is the story that we're telling. This is the data that we collect. This is why we're aligned with the funder, rather than having to be responsive and collecting the data that the funder requests. And what we're totally missing in all of this is actually the voice of the people served. So as we go from the the needs of the funder through the needs of the nonprofit, the actual stories get lost. And I know all the funders and nonprofits that I've talked to really don't want to lose these stories, really appreciate that these are the most important stories there are. But again, they get kind of lost in the shuffle. This challenge of navigating power imbalances is really something that's coming to the fore right now. There have been a lot of conversations about building equity in the social sector, raising up client voices, helping to level power between nonprofits and funders. And there are a couple of ways that I've seen this try to be managed right now. The first one is simply just trying to reduce the burden of proof. So how can a nonprofit not have to prove that what they're doing is a good idea and that they're likely to have impact as a result? And so sometimes you have external evaluators. There's something called the impact genome, where they will work with a nonprofit to validate their approach and make them an evidence-based program. So this could potentially reduce some of the burden on nonprofits to show what it is that they're doing is actually meaningful. Another thing that has become even sort of more common is reducing the application reporting burdens on nonprofits so that they have more time to actually deliver services. And Candid has actually been starting to have nonprofits report their demographic data and even their impact data through some of their mechanisms. And the Charity Navigator has a nonprofit rating system. So these would be ways of centralizing data collection so that nonprofits weren't having to report the data over and over and over again. And then most emergent in the field are funding strategies that are actually built to level power, which in my opinion is kind of the best way to do it. So in trust-based philanthropy, you build a partnership between the funder, the nonprofit, and the people served so that they're all working together to provide the services that communities need and to define impact and value in the way that communities find most useful. There's also sustained general operating support, which is when funders are giving nonprofits a sum of money that isn't attached to a program. And what this does is it allows nonprofits to be able to spend the money in ways that help them deliver services in the best way possible. And then there's something that is just emerging called enterprise capital, which is a way of really building the sustainability of nonprofits in the long term. What is missing from these really innovative funding strategies is a way of defining success and identifying metrics of success that everybody can agree on and get behind and use for building those partnerships going forward. And I want to talk a little bit about why defining success is so hard. So nonprofits, individual nonprofits, are focused on individual success. They're working with a number of people, and they're trying to move each of those people from a stuck place to a place of success. And you've got lots of nonprofits in a community working with lots of people. Sometimes those people overlap, helping those people realize their goals and their aspirations. And when those local nonprofits are working with enough people, they start to be able to see community change. And because they're serving enough people and enough people are seeing success. And for funders, this starts getting us towards systems change. When lots of communities are experiencing lots of change, systems start to change, and we start to get to this better vision that we're all hoping for. But what's tricky in this is, what do you do when you've got nonprofits focusing on individual success, funded by funders who are focused on systems change? How do we define success so that it is definable for both of those stakeholders? One way that we have kind of tried to fix this problem is by using theories of change. These are something that were invented by evaluation scientists in the mid-1990s. And this is sort of some theoretical research citations that say, well, if we're going to focus on this certain problem, this wraps up into a way that a community problem can be solved. These are super important for knowing that some strategy that a nonprofit is using is a good idea. But the problem with this is it's disconnected from the logic models, which has the data in it. Both logic models and theories of change are kind of disconnected from mission. And there's no real clear format for what a theory of change should be. And so a lot of organizations kind of struggle articulating them. And so To summarize, these are the 6 challenges that I see resulting in the pressure that the social sector is feeling. The pressure to be a scientist and prove what you do works. The fact that data collection can be really hard. Even when you have data, being unsure how to use it. Really struggling with whose story you're telling and how to use data to tell the different stories. Navigating these power imbalances. How do we actually create opportunities for true partnerships where the social sector is working together, and the sum is greater than the whole, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts? And how do we define success when we're talking about individual success versus systems change? So as I've worked in the social sector over the last 20 plus years, I started to really think about, well, what if there was a straightforward, actionable, and sustainable strategy for collaboratively tracking impact and telling impact stories? Something that really could be used in the field in the everyday work that maybe was drawn from science, but is not science. And that's how I came up with the impact story strategy. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to talk with you about what the impact story strategy is and give you a taste of each of its components. The impact story strategy is made up of 3 steps, so that you're clear about your strategy and what it is that you're doing. You're confident in gathering the data that helps you tell your story, and you're using the state-of-the-art techniques in telling compelling stories that move people to action. So let's look at the very first part, a solid framework. As I talked about before, logic models and theories change. Those are 2 story frameworks, but both of them are not really centered on data or mission. And so in thinking about what a good storytelling framework would be, I started to think about return on investment. Both for-profit businesses and social sectors are both businesses. It's just that in the for-profit, you're getting profit. That's your return on investment. And in the social sector, you're getting goodness. So what if we looked at return on investment as being the goodness produced by the social sector? And what if we centered that on mission? Social sector organizations are mission-driven organizations. And so if we focus on mission, we're saying that our mission is to address a community level need. And we are going to do that through a set of solutions and programs and activities. I'm going to talk about a little bit more about solutions in the next slide. But for now, there's a way that that mission is implemented. And in order to implement that mission well, there need to be a set of resources. They're usually things that we're asking funders and donors for. And the return on investment is twofold. It's how many people are served and how much work is done, so the productivity. And it's the impact for the people that were served, the immediate impact, what people leave services with that they're able to then use for long-term change in their lives. And when you've got lots of organizations working on lots of different missions towards collaborative vision, that's when you actually are able to sort of start moving the dial. So what a strategic impact map does is it really focuses on the impact that a specific organization or portfolio is making and how that might roll up with other kinds of community level efforts that are going to change that community level impact over time. I know this is too small to see. You don't need to really be able to read it, but this is what a strategic impact map looks like. In the Academy, we actually build a strategic impact map for your organization or your portfolio together. And what it does is, again, it starts you in your mission. It goes through mission-driven solutions. And what I've noticed with organizations is that with nonprofit organizations, there's often a set of programs and activities that are focused on impacts that only a few people can get and are really focused on changing somebody's life. And so that would be one mission-driven solution, the deep touch that's really making a change in somebody's life, really putting them on a different trajectory. Then there's often a set of programs and activities that are focused on a slightly different kind of impact, which might be a learning or capacity building impact, which people are able then to take forward in their life. This can serve a whole bunch more people. And then there's often sort of a more vague kind of community education, support, advocacy kind of set of strategies that are focused on people knowing about the problem and knowing what kinds of resources are available for that to address that problem. And so one of the things that I think strategic impact maps do that are really wonderful is divide programming into these kinds of categories focused on impact so that you're able to make that impact a lot more actionable. when you have impact that you're not pleased with, you know exactly which kinds of programs and activities you need to be able to address in order to move something forward. Once you know what it is you're doing, you need to be able to talk about why that is, why those immediate impacts are expected to result in long-term change and community level change. And so we need to be able to ground what the social sector does in programs at work, whether you're a nonprofit or you're a funder. So instead of having this theory of change, which is a little bit vague, I've created something called an impact statement. And an impact statement at the top, you talk about the community level need so that your readers know that this is really a problem in the community that you're addressing. You have maybe a dozen or fewer citations that are accessible. These are citations that are not behind paywalls. They're not written in science. They're written in language that anybody can read and understand, for why this programming is expected to have a longer term impact for the people served. It used to be that we had to go to the library and get research and copy it and have that, but now there's all sorts of resources, very high quality resources available online where we can pull down synthesis of this research that's really accessible and readable. And then lots of organizations are adjusting that programming for the context or assumptions in their organization. So it's important to be able to know what those are. This becomes especially powerful when you actually marry it with your strategic impact map. So you can actually use these citations to cite each or most of the programs and activities that an organization is engaged in and be able to cite that that's how we know that immediate impact and longer term change and even community level impact is something that can be achieved through this programming. I have some resources on my website. Like I said, these are all over the web. And so I've tried to pull them together for you. In my impact store, I have some impact statements I've already created. There's one for affordable housing freely available at that link. And I also have a resource library where if you go to Programming That Works on the left-hand side, it pops up subjects, and there are lots of resources for all sorts of subjects that you can use for supporting programming. I have to say, in my 20 years of working with nonprofits and funders, I really have not found any activities where the bulk of what a nonprofit is doing doesn't have some basis in what we know should work. And so now you've got two pieces. You've got your plan, and on the other side, you have why it's a good idea. And this really grounds you in having specific, structured, and meaningful strategy to guide your data collection and your storytelling. This has been the bread and butter of what I've done with organizations over the last 20 years. It's been something that people have asked me to train and do with them all the time. And it's something that really helps nonprofit and social sector leaders feel much more grounded and comfortable in being able to say, this is what we do, this is what it results in, and this is why we think it's going to result in long-term change. So once you know what that immediate impact is, you're ready to actually survey your clients to find out whether or not they got it. And so we're going to talk about creating smart surveys that are collecting exactly the immediate impact that you know you need to tell your story. I want you to think about surveys as a simple way to summarize clients' impact stories. They do not replace going out and talking to clients and getting narrative understanding and deep understanding of what it is that happens to them, but it is a way of capturing lots of information about what they experience in a very succinct way. Surveys could ask for demographics, opinions, and experiences. Very importantly, they should never be pre-post. You should always give surveys only posts and ask clients, since working with us, how much have you gained X, Y, and Z? I know this might sound really surprising to a lot of you. And in the Academy, we talk about why this is important and when you can use pre-post, and there are some times when you can. But for now, just know that mostly you should only be asking post surveys. Here's the value of these surveys. One, they really amplify a client's voice and center your impact on your client experience, which is super important, especially when, as we said before, clients they cannot vote with their wallet. They don't have a lot of choice about where they can get services. And so if they're going to be getting services from you, it should be primary for nonprofits to be able to understand what their experience is. Because the questions that you're asking are aligned with your strategic impact map, which is showing how you're fulfilling your mission, these help you show your impact in the context of fulfilling your mission and contributing to community level impact. They're going to be providing nonprofit leaders with information they can act on to improve programming, and they're going to help support staff and program performance. From a funder's point of view, they're able to take this data and it helps them understand what clients are getting from the nonprofit they're working with, and helps them be able to have really productive conversations with nonprofit partners about how to improve programming. Here's what a survey can have on it. Well, actually, let me start by saying one kind of impact a client might get is things that they accomplish, and that's usually observed. So that's going to be things like credentials, driver's license, creating a business plan, things like that. But all these other things are things you actually have to ask people about. When a person is getting a service from a nonprofit, really, if you think about it, the only things that they can walk away with are knowledge, skills, and access. They can know things that they didn't know before. They can know how to do things that they didn't know how to do before. And they have barriers reduced and opportunities presented that they didn't have before. So that's it, knowledge, skills, and access. But in order for them to be able to carry that into the future, they have to feel good about using what they got, and they have to believe that they will use it. So it's important to ask clients about confidence and motivation. And then again, because clients can't vote with their wallets, we need to be asking them whether or not they felt connected with the program and the staff, and whether or not they liked the services that they were getting. This is really where Listen for Good is focusing a lot of their work. This is what they call client feedback about the programming. So your survey should be asking about knowledge, skills, access, confidence, motivation, relevance, and satisfaction, and you can be collecting data about what they accomplished during service provision. There are a lot of ways of asking these questions, but I have created a very succinct sort of sample survey to kind of get people started with how you might ask these kinds of questions, and it's available here at this bit.ly link. So once you have the survey data, what do you do with it? A lot of times people get very intimidated by the words data analysis because it makes them think about statistics. I actually have a blog that's hyperlinked here that says that why you don't need to know what you need to know about statistics, which is only like 300 words, and why you really shouldn't use it. And the reasons nonprofits shouldn't be using statistics is because they're actually summarizing client feedback. They want to understand the feedback, respond to the feedback, and be able to tell those stories. And funders, they're actually combining the impact across their grant making to support impact, to iterate and expand successful programming. So in these scenarios, social sector leaders are not scientists. They're not doing experiments and testing hypotheses, and it's just not their mission, unless it is. There are some social sector organizations that are really focused on research or demonstrating that programs work. But by and large, day in and day out, most social sector nonprofits and funders are really trying just to figure out what is it that they're doing, how well are they doing it, and how can they do more of it. So what do you need? You actually just need a little tiny bit of math. You need to know how to create a percentage, and ideally you should know how to add things, count things, and average things in Excel. And then you need to be able to have two graphs. How do you compare groups, and how do you look at things over time? And that's it. In the Academy, I have templates, and we go through how to do these things. This is where the real power lies, though, is in actually understanding your data. I have a structure and a strategy for what I call a learning and insight team. And this is a process for inclusively turning data into knowledge. So in the Academy, we talk about who should be on your team and how to make that a more inclusive and growth-oriented process. But in general, what's happening is that data is put into graphs so that you can understand what the data is saying. So the graphs can be understood. This graph is showing that women had more of this than men, or this is showing that people who got this service learned more than people who got this service. The real power lies in step 3, which is determining why that data is actually showing up the way it is. Why did women learn more? Why did that group get more out of it than this other group? And determining why is entirely contextual. It's entirely based on the lived expertise of the people on your learning and insight team. So that's why your learning and insight team should have lots of different expertise on it, because understanding that why is how we build knowledge. And that knowledge is what informs our action to improve programming, our actions to extend programming, our actions to fund in different kinds of ways. So this process of understanding what our graphs are saying and understanding the why behind them, this is really where the key is. So once you have your data and you've analyzed your data and you've understood why it's showing you what it's showing you, you have aligned, connected, and valid information that is related directly to your strategy and how you've mapped it out, and you can be confident in what it is that you know. I've worked with lots of organizations to analyze their data and help them understand it. And it really can be a very empowering and cool process to experience. All right. So now you know your story. How do you get it out there? The first piece we're going to talk about is data visualization, because this is often underappreciated. But the first step in being able to tell a story that people listen to and actually moves people to action is to show them data in a way that they can digest it, that they want to read it. Depict Data Studio is my place of choice to get my information about how to do data visualization. The woman, Ann Emery, who owns that organization, has fabulous training and a really, really helpful blog that helps you understand some of the real good tricks and tips and tricks for doing data visualization. And we go into all of these in the Academy, but you can sort of see here how this 3 and 10 students and 5 and 10 students in schools is a really simple, clear way of showing the impact of the work that you do. And now we get to weaving all of this together and telling those powerful impact stories. So when you have your solid framework and your programming that works, that informs the survey questions that you ask. You then analyze and understand that data. You then present it masterfully in ways that people really want to read. And now you're ready to tell your impact stories. When you have all this humming along at your organization, these stories are just at your fingertips. There are 4 kinds of stories that nonprofit service organizations want to tell. They want an internal director's report, and this is going to be all the nitty gritty, all of the dashboards, all of the learning and impact team reports, all of those things sort of internally facing that help the director and their team really make decisions about improving the programs. Then you're going to have an annual report, and this is an outward facing report. It's going to be very graphic. It's really usually just the good news and what our priorities are for going forward. This is to help the community celebrate the successes and understand what the organization does. Then you have graphic one-pagers or even single graphics that are very clear calls to action that you use to help people understand a problem or an opportunity and ask them to do something about it. And then you have the all-important grant narrative where you're talking to funders and donors about, here's what it is that we're doing, here's how we know we're doing a good job, and here's what it is that we could use from you to continue to do a good job. Funders are using data that they get from nonprofits to tell 3 essential impact stories. One are internal portfolio reports. So this is where you're able to roll up the impact that your nonprofits are giving you and be able to see how those portfolios are starting to contribute to community systems change. You have a very similar annual report that is the good news about the impact that you're making and maybe your ways forward. And then you have the same kinds of graphic one-pagers or graphics that are calls to action. So let's actually look at a couple of stories and see how all this fits together. Here's a nonprofit story. Here we're looking just at step 1 about being clear. Here's how we would talk about this business plan for impact and why your programming should work. We value a literate society. We have this vision where everybody can read, and this really is a problem in our community. Here's the data that shows that students are falling behind in reading. And so we're really focused on improving reading for students. We use program X, which has some evidence behind it in the last 16 weeks, but we've had to adapt it for our particular community because we really need to be helping kids through 9th grade, not just through 8th grade. And what we're doing is we have 3 reading coaches serving 35 students a year. And once we've collected our data, this is what we're able to say. After 19 weeks, Nina rose to grade level, as did 70% of all the students that we worked with. And you can have a picture of Nina, and you can have a short story, or you can have a long story about her success. And then you're able to say, and Nina's success story is true for 7 out of 10 students that we worked with. Here's that really all-important call to action. Once you've sat with your learning and insight team and you understand why those 30%, those 3 in 10 students didn't actually achieve reading level, you understand that some students just need more intensive coaching. And with the investment of a funder or a donor, you can actually hire a 4th coach to work with those students who are struggling the most. Now let's look at the funder story. The funder story is similar, but different. So here's their clarity. They envision a more equitable society through access to literacy. There's some population of people that they understand to not be meeting literacy benchmarks. And their mission is to fund organizations that support equitable societies through literacy. And they have an idea of what kinds of programs and strategies there's some evidence behind that they want to be able to fund. Their nonprofits are able to go out and do that work, and they're able to support them in that data collection. And let's pretend they have a portfolio of 3 programs: organization A, B, and C, using programs X, Y, and Z. Organization A is the one from our example before. They help 75% of 35 students get on grade level in reading. This is a lot of words. So one of the things that's really helpful about this strategy is foundations being able to use this to actually turn these words into something that they can really communicate. So this might be portfolio performance. You might have here, in FY24, we supported literacy of 222 people. I'm actually noticing an error here. This should be in the success column. It should be 30 people, not 35 people. So in one column, you've got the number of people who succeeded, and in the total served column, you have the number of people who were served. And that helps you know that 8.5 out of 10 people gained literacy as a result of the funding that, in the programs that they supported. In having really productive learning conversations with their nonprofit partners, they can identify opportunities for increasing literacy rates even more. So for example, they might say, okay, this funder might say, we're going to help hire that 4th coach so that 10 more students can get to grade level. We're going to explore, program B is going to figure out how to keep the refugees who are leaving their reading program in the program so that they can complete it. And program C is actually going to expand their programming to 2 more high schools. This means that in FY25, this funder is going to be able to get 400 people closer to their systems change goal. So now you can see how nonprofits and funders can have engaging, trustworthy, and actionable stories to tell. And with the organizations that I've used, they've been able to tell these stories and use these stories to be more clear and confident in telling these stories and moving people to action. I have here, just for nonprofits, not for funders, little quiz you can take yourself that helps you see which of these 6 areas you really already have it under control and which areas you might need to boost up. And so if you think about, even just reflect on what it is I've talked about, and you think, man, what do I already have going at my organization and where could I beef things up? I'd like you to think a little bit about where you'd like your impact tracking and storytelling to be a year from now. And I've got 3 ways that you can access the strategy and help get yourself there. The first one, and I'm going to talk about what's in the Academy in a moment, but I offer an intensive 9 weeks Academy in the ImpactStory Strategy twice a year, once in March and April, and another time between Labor Day and Halloween. The March Academy starts this year. And if you register before the 29th of February, you can get 10% off. I'm going to talk to you about what is in that program in a moment. The other thing that I'm going to be launching this fall is an Impact Specialist Partnership Program, and this is sustained fractional data support. The data support uses the ImpactStory strategy, and you can embed just the right amount of fractional support in an organization so that they're able to put the ImpactStory strategy into place and keep it running, humming along, so that the leaders of the organization have that data anytime they need it. And everybody that I work with becomes a member of the network. We have a listserv where we are able to communicate and share resources and ask questions. And starting this month, I'm holding monthly office hours. So if you're already part of my network, you saw an email go out yesterday that said when office hours are going to start. All right, so let's talk about the Academy and what it looks like. The Academy is for nonprofits and funders, and it gives you all of the information, tools, resources, templates, and examples that you need to implement and run the ImpactStory strategy at your organization. Historically, this has only been for nonprofits. By special request this March, I'm starting one for funders too. My dream would be to have nonprofits and funders in the same ImpactStory Academy, but for right now, I've got two academies running, one for nonprofits and one for funders. So the Spring Academy, funders are going to meet on Mondays, nonprofits are going to meet on Tuesdays. This is the calendar of events. We start off with a orientation and goal setting. We then move to step one, being clear and setting that framework. Then we have a nice work day where we all work together to create that framework. Then we work on data collection and data analysis. And then we have a work day where I actually, for nonprofits, I dig into the Excel data analysis and how to do that. And for funders, we practice a learning and insight team meetings so that you know how to partner with the nonprofits to really understand data and move it forward. And then we end with actually telling some really powerful impact stories. Each class runs formally from 2 to 3:30. I show up 15 minutes early so that we can gather and talk if you want. And then I stay for half an hour afterwards so that folks can stay and ask questions or work on individual work with me if they want. So all in all, you get 18 hours of live learning over those 9 weeks. Who should attend? The first piece of good news is that the price for the Academy is for organizations, not for people. So any organization can have as many people join as they'd like. I strongly recommend that at least one person take every single class, so that there's some continuity, they build on each other. But there might be people in the organization who should really just come to 1 or 2 of the classes, and that's totally fine. The people who come should either be the people who are in charge of building the learning data culture and or the people who are actually going to be using the data. So those could be directors, they might be development and marketing people, they might be program or grants managers, and they certainly could be internal data managers or evaluators. So you can come to the Academy just out of curiosity. You don't have to have anything at all other than curiosity. But if you want to get the most out of the Academy, you're going to have full buy-in from your leadership that you guys want to be a learning organization that is committed to using data. Leadership has to create some spaciousness. This is not super hard or complex, and it's something that can be sustained in 5 hours a week or less for most smaller organizations. But that is still space that has to be made at the organization. And so you need that buy-in from the leadership, and you need an organization that's ready to be able to use it. Also, a desire for authentic trust-based funder-grantee relationships, a desire to really want to be able to talk to your partner in making systems change about what is needed to actually advance individual success towards systems change. You really should have the ability to come to class every week, and you'll get the most out of it if you do a little bit of homework. The entire weekly commitment is less than 3 hours a week. The good news is that I do record all of the sessions. So if you miss a class or if you want to re-review a class, it's always there for you to be able to look at. And all of the work that we do is in Excel. Remember, it's only basic math, but some basic Excel skills, knowing how Excel works, what a formula is, and how to create a basic graph is pretty important. You can be a little worried about data and numbers, that's okay, but you should have the courage to come in and be able to start to play with them. And what do you walk away with? In general, you walk away with the confidence to tell clear and compelling impact stories that move people to action. Specifically, you will leave with a strategic impact map so that you have ownership of your story and are able to tell it. You'll know how to analyze and interpret your data. Nonprofits will get to work on a survey. You'll get ongoing access to all of the session recordings and tools so you can review them or train new people. I'm going to show you the workbook toolbox in a bit. This has all sorts of resources that you can use to remind yourself of what you need to do and also to dig a little deeper if you want. I have a growing library of bonus video tutorials so that you can get a little hands-on experience with some of the little more peripheral kinds of things having to do with the strategy. You become part of my network and have access to monthly office hours for asking all sorts of questions, having me review things, talk about how you are visualizing your data or how you're analyzing it, talk through stuck points. And you're going to leave, very importantly, with common language and a common idea of what your impact is for your organization. Everything in the Academy is designed to be actionable. It's designed to be, actually, here is the tool and how to use the tool so you can go forward and use it in your organization right away. Here is the workbook toolbox that I've created. It's sort of the companion text for the Academy. And it's divided into sections of each of the parts of the Academy. And when you go in, you'll see that there's all sorts of resources. There's lists of evidence-based practices. There's lists of where you can get community level data. There's specific links to little tutorials to teach you how to do little things in Excel that you might not know how to do. There's a reminder of the difference between percent change and percent increase. There's all sorts of examples that you can reference so that you can really get an idea of what it is that you want your story to look like. And here is examples from the pages in the workbook. So you can see there's clickable links and there's lists and there's strategies for doing things. I will tell you that so far, 100% of participants who've gone through the Academy have felt really confident that they could use what they've learned. And I am confident that you will too. So become a part of my Academy and my community. If you're not already on my mailing list, please join it here. Every other week, I put out email about some sort of impact story strategy insight, some little tip or trick that can help make your life easier. You can follow me on social media. And I very much hope to see you at the Academy. Thank you.